The views and opinions of the following show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of News Talk 1450 WOL, Radio 1 Incorporated, or their management.
Welcome to Beyond Just Talk. This is a positive, inspirational, and thought-provoking program that discusses life and business topics from a solution-oriented perspective with your host, S.L. Young.
All right. Welcome. It's another great day, and we're ready to discuss subjects that will make a difference in your day. This is the place that people connect, ideas are shared, and lives are enriched. My name is Stacey Young. My author's name is S.L. Young, but please call me Sly. Before we get started today, next week, my guest is a science, technology, engineering, and math, otherwise known as STEM, program coordinator at a local community college, a certified cybersecurity professional, and someone who has also worked at some of the nation's most prominent security agencies. For this week, we'll do a recap of last week's show, discuss Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, have a conversation with my guest, Barry Gribble, an award-winning writer and director, and then preview next week's guest. So on last week's show, it was a very informative hour in which the topics were related to Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, which is this month in July, and sickle cell disease were discussed. Both of these health challenges require medical attention to save lives. Folks, let's remember that if anyone has a medical issue, any medical issues that require attention, let's stop judging, remove the unnecessary evaluations, and start saving lives. No one should ever be caused to feel bad about anything that's related to themselves or any medical issue that's being treated. At the top of last week's show, I shared information about my battle with depression and my journey to recover after a near suicide in March 2014. Since the last show, I became aware of 3 people who decided to end their lives by death by suicide, and another personal friend told me about her family member's failed attempt that's now left this person brain dead. I also had an opportunity to have a conversation with Miss Mary Hansen, who contacted me after reading my article, Letter to Myself the Day Before My Near Suicide, written a year later. Ms. Hansen shared with me the significance of my article to her because her son, Brian Hansen, took his life a little over 3 years ago on February 9th, 2012. The night before her son's death, Ms. Hansen spoke with him. However, he wasn't very responsive. Her son told her that something just didn't feel right, but he couldn't describe or identify the words to detail his feelings. Early the next morning, Mrs. Hansen was awakened by the police, who told her that her son was dead. I connected with Mrs. Hansen's story as it was very similar to mine, as I was on the phone with one of my brothers and not very responsive a short while prior to my plan to end my life. The difference in my case is that I became emotional and my brother recognized my medical emergency and kept calling me until I reluctantly returned his calls. Then he directed me to contact her sister to tell her about the way that I was feeling too. If someone says to you that they're not feeling well, whether they can explain it or not, please promise that you will stop and listen. In recognition of this month being Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, I wrote an article entitled, Someone Stopped and Listened, It's the Only Reason I'm Still Alive, or its title on the Huffington Post, I Was Almost Another Suicide Statistic. If you'd like to read my article with a link to my blog on the Huffington Post, it's available at slyoung.com/stop-and-listen.html. Also on my website, I have a hidden link to a collection of my materials that address depression on many different levels, including the article just discussed. This information is available at slyoung.com/depression.html. Now moving on to last week's other discussion topic, which was sickle cell disease. My first guest was Mrs. Nakia Vaughn, who discussed the impacts and considerations for individuals who want to have a child, but one or more parents has sickle cell disease, the trait, or both. She explained that a parent who has sickle cell disease will pass it on to their child. However, a parent who has the trait has a 50% chance of their child having sickle cell disease. Mrs. Vaughn wasn't on the show just to educate the Beyond Just Talk audience via a general discussion about sickle cell disease. She was also on to share her family's personal story, which led her to become a sickle cell disease advocate. This disease is personal to her because her husband and her daughter Simone have sickle cell disease, and Mrs. Vaughn and her son have the trait for sickle cell disease. Mrs. Vaughn discovered that she had the trait for sickle cell disease while she was pregnant with her son, who also has the trait. Her daughter, Simone, was diagnosed with sickle cell disease at 6 weeks old. Mrs. Vaughn recommends that couples undergo genetic counseling while in the planning process for a pregnancy. Currently, in all 50 states, tests for sickle cell disease at the time of a child's birth is mandatory. A child who is born with sickle cell disease should see a hematologist as soon as possible. At the same time, parents should learn about pain crisis if their child is diagnosed with sickle cell disease, or otherwise known as the sickle cell crisis, to understand the things to do or not to do, and also obtain parental support and assistance. Anyone who hasn't been tested for sickle cell disease can request testing to determine if they have the disease or a trait is present in their body. Mrs. Vaughn and her family's journey led her to create Simone and Friends, which provides information about the disease, support, and advocacy to support families, caregivers of children living with sickle cell anemia with counseling and financial assistance. If you want to learn more about our organization, please visit SimoneandFriends.com. That's SimoneandFriends.com. My featured guest last week was Keir Jr. Spates, who is a comedian, actor, radio personality, and also the ambassador for the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America, otherwise known as SCDAA. In 2013, the SCDAA announced that Mr. Spates would become its national celebrity ambassador for the Rise Above campaign after his disclosure about his struggles with the disease. During our conversation, we learned about sickle cell disease, the impacts, pains, and some of the treatment options. I really appreciate Mr. Spates' candor in being vulnerable enough to share his journey in a powerful way that can help others to understand, manage, and treat this disease. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done before there's a cure, so that no one else has to experience the pains associated with sickle cell disease. Using Mr. Spates' signature tagline, "This just got serious," which it has been for a while, but I believe he would also say, manage the sickle cell crisis and then get back to enjoying your life by doing the things you want to do. During the last show, I gave a call to action, and here's a reminder. On April 16, 2015, a bill was reintroduced in the House of Representatives, number 1807, to renew the nation's programs for research, surveillance, prevention, and treatment of sickle cell disease. This bill's goals are to improve the quality of life and treatment for those affected by sickle cell disease, including working towards prevention. This bill includes having funding for 25 sickle cell treatment centers throughout the U.S. and many more valuable services. So please contact your representative to push for the passage of this bill. To learn more about sickle cell disease, support the SCDAA's efforts, or to make a donation to this invaluable organization, please visit its website at sicklecelldisease.org. If you missed either of these conversations, you can listen to them on my website at slyoung.com/bjt-radio.html. If you'd like to connect with me after the show, you can reach me on my website at slyoung.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/beyondjusttalk, one word, or locate me on Twitter, Google+, Instagram, and SoundCloud using the handle SLYOUNGVA. As for the rest of today's show, we'll discuss the journey my guest took to become an award-winning writer and director, understand the motivations and reasons behind his film projects, learn about his creative process, obtain insight into his decisions to be an independent versus working with an established entertainment powerhouse, discuss the reasons behind the timing of his move to LA, and learn about the television festival's purpose and the reasons it's important for and to aspiring writers and directors. Before I introduce today's guest, I want listeners to know that if you'd like to join our conversation, please dial 1-800-450-7876. My guest today, Barry Gribble, is an award-winning writer and director. His pilot, Dog, was awarded Best Television Show at the Independent Television Festival. His pilot, 3View, was nominated for Best Drama, Best Director, and Best Writer at the Independent Television Festival, ITVF, and Best Drama at the New York Television Festival, NYTVF. Mr. Gribble is a self-taught filmmaker. His knowledge is derived from trial and error, reading books, and discussions in online forums. He's also taught students at the Boston University Center for Digital Imaging Arts in Washington, D.C. about lighting, sound, editing, producing, and other filmmaking topics. A small selection of his accomplishments include being a finalist in the New York Television Film Festival Samsung Second Screen Contest for his pilot, The Conspiracist. Executive producer for 24 episodes of Coldcast Presents for an upstart cable network, U2 America. Writer and producer on The A-List on Animal Planet, and current credit on several episodes of the series Yao Yao. Now, without further ado, I welcome my guest, who is an independent spirit, who loves to pursue his passions, a self-taught filmmaker, someone who loves to give back to share his talents with others, and an award-winning writer and director. Barry Gribble, welcome to Beyond Just Talk.
Well, thank you very much, Stacey. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to have you here, and please call me Sly. And so let's do a little bit of introduction for folks here. And who is Barry Gribble?
Oh, I am. You summed up sort of my career side, but I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. I actually originally went to engineering school. I have a degree in electrical engineering, but I sort of, I always played music while I did that. I always knew I wanted to be creating art, but it just took me a while to get around to it. And so now I am Barry Gribble filmmaker instead of Barry Gribble engineer.
All right. Isn't it interesting how life sort of directs us in one direction and then we figure things out a little bit later? And so what navigated you or directed you towards filmmaking? What made you make that change? Because you were doing something else. You were doing computer programming prior, right?
Yes. I kind of evolved. Right out of college, I started doing computer programming and sort of made the slow evolution to doing more creative work. When the web became a big thing, I moved into web development, thinking I would do the boring kind of things that I was doing in computer programming, and found out that I really liked the creative side of it more. And I just sort of continued on that train of doing more and more creative work as my bread and butter, basically. I grew up sort of with the belief that that work had to not be fun. Mm-hmm. And doing art was just what you did when you weren't doing work.
Right.
And it took me a while to merge those two in my brain and to understand, I can do art and get paid for that. Why would I not be doing that all the time?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's great because when you can combine your profession with your passion, it doesn't feel like work at all, right? Right,
exactly. And that's different. It's different than slogging away at something you don't like. I think Steve Jobs is an amazing, amazing person. And he used to basically say that if at the end of every day, if you don't look back on the day and say, if this was my last day, I'd be happy with what I did today, then you're doing something wrong. And that's the way he lived his life. That's a really high bar to set.
Right.
But it's a great kind of thing to aspire to thinking, what you do every day has to be what you love doing.
But I think sometimes the thing that holds us back the most is that fear. And that's a difficult thing to sometimes get past. Folks will often say, you need to just get over it and do it. But that's a lot harder than actually doing it. So how did you make that transition to move past your fear?
Oh, it was really hard and really slow, basically. I had, in fact, I thought about this. In my late 20s, I used to have this thing I called the guidance counselor question. I would talk to people and I'd ask them,
hey, Barry, we're actually going to have you hold on for just a moment. We're going to have to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back, and we'll continue our discussion about fear.
News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.
Good morning. This WOL traffic update is brought to you by Wild Alaska Seafood. 295 southbound. Still pretty heavy from Benning Road down to East Capitol Street, but nothing reported in the way. Northbound in the 3rd Street Tunnel up toward New York Avenue is going to be very heavy. Independence Avenue southeast at 10th Street, it was a fuel spill reported. How about grilling something really good for dinner, like the exceptional flavor and nutrition of Wild Alaska Sockeye Salmon? Find recipes at wildalaskaseafood.com. Now your WOL weather forecast brought to you by Wendy's new organic honest tropical green tea for today. Afternoon thunderstorms, a high near 87. A few more storms possible overnight. down to 71. Partly cloudy in the morning tomorrow. Scattered thunderstorms in the afternoon, a high near 86. Try Wendy's new organic, honest tropical green tea made with freshly brewed, lightly sweetened green tea with hints of tropical mango and pineapple flavors. Available at participating Wendy's. Steve Herzog for News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. You're listening to Beyond Just Talk with S.L. Young, which is me. And so if you'd like to join our conversation, you can dial in at 1-800-450-7876. My guest today is Barry Gribble, an award-winning director and writer. And prior to the break, we were talking about fear. So sorry, Barry, we had to do those painful commercials, but, it is what it is. So,
Absolutely.
How did you get past the fear to move forward?
It was a long journey for me, as I was saying. I used to have the guidance counselor test that I would use to help other people figure out what they wanted to do. And that question would be, okay, if you won the lottery today and never had to work another day in your life, what would you do? How would you fill your day at that point? Would you save animals? Would you travel? Would you fix old cars? Everybody's got an answer, although it takes a while sometimes to that question. And I was asking a friend of mine, hey, what would you do? And he said he worked for a nonprofit. He said, I would make films. And I was like, well, then you should do that. He's like, well, I can't do that for a living. And he was giving me all these reasons that he couldn't do it. And then in the end, he turned it to me. He's like, well, what would you do? And I said, well, actually, I think I would make films. And he's like, well, why did you do that? I was like, oh, I can't do that. And it was so funny to me, even at the time, that I was sitting there arguing for him that he should not pay attention to his internal limitations. And I was doing the exact same thing.
Isn't it funny that you're getting past those internal limitations? Because being our own critics and getting in our own way is sometimes the biggest challenge, right?
Absolutely. It's the only biggest challenge, I think. Not the only. I mean, I don't downplay the challenges that, yeah. But I genuinely feel that if you put all of your heart into something, you can make it happen. You can make the best thing happen for you that can happen. Basically, I'm never going to be a linebacker, no matter how hard I put my heart into that. But you can be the most that you are capable of by putting your heart into it. And by the most, I don't just mean by some external scale, but in terms of just your personal fulfillment in what you're doing. For me, unfortunately, the catalyst, I think, was my father's passing. My father I loved dearly. I grew up sort of believing I was a carbon copy of him. And but he did not see art as something that you did. Like that was just wasting time in his mind, basically. He tolerated that I played music. He was okay. He would come to my concerts. I think he was sort of proud. But that was not what you did. And I think, unfortunately, ultimately, it was his passing that let me sort of get past that and see, no, I don't have to relegate that to what I do in my spare time. That really can be what I do with all my heart and all my time.
Now, was it your father's death that catapulted you to do something else, or was there something else that clicked after his death that said, you need to go in a different direction?
It was, there was never a switch that was thrown for me. It was a very slow transition over the course of 8 years, probably.
Okay.
But his death was sort of the catalyst. It started, it sent me a little bit into a spiral. And first, I want to take a moment here to commend you on the work you're doing about mental health and destigmatization. I think it's very, very important. I went into therapy right as my father was dying. I was in couples counseling with somebody I was seeing, and concurrent with my father passing, I went into therapy, and that's exactly what I needed at the time to deal with the grief. And I kept up with that work, and that is really what got me there in terms of figuring out what it was that I really needed to be once you stripped away all the stuff of what I thought I should be, And that's not, a lot of times in the movies that happens in a light bulb moment. Somebody says, oh my God, I need to do this. And they, quit their job on the spot and run off and start a pizzeria or something. But for me, it was slow. I started doing more and more artistic things. I started looking more and more at doing them for business. The first year I ever made money doing video, I probably made 95% of my money doing programming and web design still, and just 5% of it, 10% of it off of video. And then it just slowly shifted in the other direction, and I slowly became more and more comfortable with it. And it really wasn't until my first festival success with I did a pilot called Code Word Secret with a friend of mine named Kevin Good, and we got it in the New York Television Festival, and it did very well. I got the attention of the guy who created Everybody Loves Raymond. His name is Phil Rosenthal. He saw it and picked me to be a mentor for me, which was amazing.
Wow. Putting yourself out there led to that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when it transitioned for me, and I started realizing, I could really do this. Because until then, I loved it, but it was still sort of what I was doing on the side.
Mm-hmm. As a part-time job.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a big transition for me. But like I said, it wasn't a light bulb moment for me. It was slowly getting there, doing more and more and more, learning more and more. Like you said, I was self-taught. I just bought a camera and I started playing with it and started shooting things for fun, just random things, people at parties. I'd every once in a while make a short film, and then it evolved. But I remember the very first time, there's a thing called the 48-Hour Film Project, which is a contest where everybody gets together and they draw a topic out of a hat on Friday night, and by Sunday night they have to have a finished film based on that. Mm-hmm. And I had written for that for one, and it was the first time the people I was working with were professional videographers. And it was the first time I was on a set with a professional director of photography, a professional director, like all these real pros doing it. And really the first time I saw that, I was kind of bit. I thought this is where I need to be. This is what I need to be doing. But it still took me a couple of years to think, and I can actually make my living doing this. This is something I can do.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that you covered there, but the last thing that you were saying was that you got in the environment and you just knew. Because once you were there, you just knew. But some of the other things that you said that I thought were really, really poignant were about your self-evaluation. So after your father's death, it sounds like you went through a period of self-evaluation and reflection after his passing. But then it sounded like you also sort of stripped back and removed your ego a little bit. And then you just started taking some chances to pursue something that made you feel good, something that you were passionate about.
Yes, absolutely. And, taking chances wasn't new for me. I have never been the employee of anybody else. Ever since graduating college, I have been self-employed doing whatever it is that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And for the first decade, it was computer programming and that kind of stuff. But so the taking a chance part, I mean, I was really fortunate in that I had the flexibility to do a lot of what I wanted. I could just scale back the other work I was doing to 20 hours a week and have the rest of the time to play and learn. I could buy the equipment and write it off. Not only was I was making enough money to kind of buy the camera equipment and lighting equipment that I needed, but I could even write it off because it was a business expense at that point because I was getting into it professionally. Mm-hmm. But it was stripping away that vision of who I was and just listening to my heart on it instead of my brain, basically.
And sometimes that can be very difficult, when you're dealing with the mental processing versus the emotional feelings and trying to figure out which one is right and which direction that you should go in. And I know with some of the things that I've gone through recently, I'm moving under the premise these days of no fear. If I want to try it. And there's always value in the journey, even if the outcome isn't as expected or wanted. You can always learn something from it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't believe that failure exists, basically. The only failure in the world is accepting something as failure, basically. I have made so many bad movies. I've made so many poor choices. I've made, I've done so much that was not perfect in this world.
Right.
And have learned from every bit of it. And that I'm a huge trial and error learner. Mm-hmm. I get in there and just for filmmaking, it's the way I did it. I just got in there and did it. and then looked at it and asked for other people to give me feedback on it and read how other people were doing it. But I did it a lot by trial and error, and error is not failure. That's the hard thing for a lot of people to embrace, because it feels a lot of times in culture, error feels like failure, or not winning a contest feels like failure, or not making the best film you could feels like failure. But it's all just part of the process. It's the way you learn.
And once you just went through that, it made me think about my process of getting up, and then sort of the process that you took to get up. And so I think the similarities there is you processed your feelings right away. And even if you couldn't do it by yourself, which you said you needed to go to a therapist to sort of help you. And there's nothing wrong with going with a therapist, but that was the way that you needed to cope with it at the time. The other thing is that you made a decision that you wanted to do something differently, and you actively chose to move forward. And that could be some of the most challenging thought processes that we have, is moving from decision to choosing to do something to action. Let's shift a little bit and start talking about some of your background related to directing and screenwriting. Now, was that something that you always wanted to do? Did you have it in the back of your mind someplace that you might want to do it?
Yes, I did. And it's something even from a very early age that I liked. And this is actually one of my most painful memories about my father, actually, which is sad because, and I say this, I love my father to death. He's a wonderful, kind human being. I don't think he never got the manual for how to raise an artist, basically. He never got the manual for how to raise anybody. He was orphaned by 13, I think, in a ward of the state. But I remember very early on, I don't even know how young, but very young for doing this, I started writing a book. I wrote like 4 pages of a book or 5 pages of a book. And I remember showing it to my dad, and my dad didn't read it. He just looked at me and said, well, you got to read books before you can write books. And of course, he's sort of not wrong, but, there wasn't any of that embracing of like, oh, my God, you created something. That's great. Let's create more things. Share it with me. I want to see it. I'm so proud of you. Like, he didn't get that vibe. He didn't understand that. And it's weird because me now, having made the transition and understanding what it's like, when I deal with my nieces and nephews and I look at them, I think, wow, how did my dad do that? I don't understand. I couldn't do that to save my life if they came to me with something that they created. But that part of what my challenge was in terms of finding this for myself is because, it's hard. As a young person, your brain gets wired that way.
Well, and I'm going to have to pause you just right there, and we'll come back right after the break.
Okay.
News Talk 1450 WOAM, where information is power.
This report brought to you by the Foundation for a Better Life. Commitment, pass it on, from the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com. There are police news conferences tomorrow and Thursday in Maryland and Virginia. Law enforcement officials say there are major developments in the case of 12-year-old Sheila Lyon and her 10-year-old sister Catherine, missing since 1975. They were last seen in Wheaton. As part of a community service requirement, former D.C. Councilman Michael Brown will give a series of presentations to city employees on the importance of ethics in government. They'll come after Brown finishes a 39-month federal prison sentence for taking bribes. Montgomery County police say belongings that were supposed to go to a man's relatives after his death were instead stolen by the man's former caregiver. They've arrested 45-year-old Diane Harris, who's due in court next week on a charge of felony theft. Ruth Hunter was one of the man's neighbors at the Leisure World Retirement Community in Silver Spring.
This is horrendous. She had to organize and actually come in here with a moving van to loot the man's house after he'd passed away.
Harris allegedly stole more than $43,000 worth of items from the man's condo, including his car. A nurse is requesting a jury trial. Police arrested Jared Klein of Falls Church last fall on charges of sexually abusing patients at several D.C. area hospitals. Klein turned down a plea deal earlier this year. People in Southeast D.C. are worried about the damage synthetic drugs are doing to people and their neighborhoods.
In terms of the street sales, we need to get the people to report to the police, the folks who are doing that.
Philip Pennell was among those at a meeting to discuss the problem last night at Campbell AME Church. Montgomery County Police are releasing surveillance photos of an armed robbery suspect. The man seen in the photos is believed to have held up express check cashing on Snauffer School Road in Gaithersburg last Monday. An employee was forced to hand over cash. No one was hurt. This report brought to you by the Foundation for a Better Life. Commitment, pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com. I'm John Lewis. When you're looking for news from Black America, go to newsone.com.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. Again, if you'd like to join the conversation, you can dial in at 1-800-450-7876. Today, we're talking with my guest, Barry Gribble, who is an award-winning writer and director. And so, sorry, Barry, prior to the break, you were talking about how the brain gets wired.
Yeah, I was talking about my early experiences. I had the impulse to write, but it wasn't really supported, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And even all through college, I spent a lot of time in the drama department in college. My roommate did a lot of lighting there, and so I would just hang out and help out, and I loved being in that environment. I actually built sets for plays for 3 summers during college, and I was working on a screenplay in college with my friends. And I had thoughts when I graduated of maybe I should just move to L.A., maybe I should just do this. I knew people from set construction. I knew somebody who had just moved out to LA and started working on the Cosby Show for free until they gave him a job.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, maybe I could do it, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't pull the trigger. But yes, the impulse was always there. The storytelling impulse was always with me. And I got it out through music and songwriting,
mm-hmm.
But that wasn't as fully immersive to me as filmmaking is.
But it still was an artistic outlet for you, though.
Absolutely, and it was a very, very important one. I played in bands from 15 to 30. There probably wasn't a month-long stretch that I wasn't playing in a band somewhere and writing songs and doing all of that. And so that was a very important thing to me. But it just uses sort of part of my brain, a wonderful, wonderful part of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I really found directing, I realized that it, for me, uses everything that I love to do. It uses It does use the musical side of me. It uses the technical side of me. It uses the visual side of me. It uses the managerial side of me, the interpersonal side, the emotional side. It engages everything at once. And I'm a little ADHD, and it takes a lot to engage my entire brain, and filmmaking does it. And that's part of why it's so wonderful for me. It just uses every part of my brain that I enjoy.
And I want to sort of back on a couple of points that you made that I think were significant. One of the things that we've been talking about is that you are having different outlets for your artistic skills and talents. And so one of the things that we always have to remember is that there's a lot of different ways that we can express our passions. And so just because you can't do something in one particular area doesn't mean that you can't apply those same skills and talents to something else. So I thought that was a significant point. And the other thing that you had mentioned was that when you went to your father and he wasn't really receptive of this book that you had put together and that you had put so much work in, and unfortunately that type of scenario happens way too often where someone's really passionate about something, shares it with someone else, and then someone, and I'm not necessarily saying your dad was this, but sometimes folks become dream killers. And so we have to be very, very careful of others' projections of their limitations on what you're capable of and what you can do, because they might be killing that thing that's an essential part of you. That might be what you were destined to do if you believe in that. And then we also have to remember that even if somebody is doing something that we don't necessarily agree with, we also need to understand that we should support somebody else's dream as long as it's heading towards a positive endeavor. So just a couple other points that I picked up from what you were telling me.
I agree with that. I agree with that completely. And he did not mean to be, because he's a terribly nice and wonderful guy, but he was a dream killer on that. And I internalized what he said to me. And a lot of people do that. We're wired to do that, especially from parents.
Those that, or anyone that we love or respect.
Yeah, I agree. And so it's really hard to unwire that when it gets wired that way. But I agree with you that, I mean, a lesson to people who are parents, who are friends, who are dealing with anybody who's coming to them with their dreams and their love, you have to try to respect that, even if it's not the approach you would take. Like you say, as long as it's positive. They're saying, hey, I really want to rob banks, then you may want to challenge them on that.
Exactly.
But when it is something that's positive, supporting somebody is one of the hardest things to do. Is supporting somebody to make choices that you wouldn't make is challenging, but it's necessary. It really is.
But it's also part of that unconditional support, unconditional love that is helping to nurture and develop and support someone who's trying to achieve their dreams.
Absolutely.
And then so once you started making films, was it what you expected?
Yes, it kind of was. I mean, when I went in just from the first time I bought a camera, I did not know how all-encompassing it would be for me. I didn't know how deep the passion would run for me. But I knew that I wanted to head that direction. I felt like I want to walk into this neighborhood and see what I find. And so it was a powerful pull to go that way, but it wasn't at all that I had spent my whole life thinking I want to be Steven Spielberg or something, and I just can't do it. I can't do it. And then finally I let myself do it. For me, it was more like I want to be doing something, and I had lots of ideas. Like I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I wanted to be a great scientist. I wanted to be a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But that one was a more powerful draw, but it wasn't a very clear vision of what I wanted as I walked that direction. But sort of the further I got into the woods, the more I understood that's where I needed to be.
Interesting. And then so in the early years, most of your training came from trial and error, reading books and discussion forums. Why didn't you pursue formal training?
That's a tough question. It's not that tough. It's just sort of not my MO on that. I remember I talked to a friend of mine, Joy, who, like, when I was first getting into it, she was a SAG actor. She had been in the business for a long time. And I thought, oh my God, I need to tell her about this. I need to talk to her about the business because I'm so excited about getting into this business. And so I told her what I was doing. I showed her my first film and all of this stuff. And at the end of it, she looked at me and says, so where are you thinking about going to film school? And I was aghast. I was like, well, I'm not going to film school. What are you talking about? I don't understand. I did not agree. School and I didn't agree very well. Mm-hmm. School was challenging for me. I was infuriating to some of my professors because I was often the most engaged person in class. I would sit in the front. I would ask questions. I would understand things, but I just couldn't jump through the hoops of doing the 4 hours of problem sets when I went home. And so I ended up getting very mediocre grades. And it was just a frustrating experience for both sides of the table, actually. Mm-hmm. And so that was weighing against the idea of going to film school. And then the other one is just that it's not the majority of people in this business who have. It's not like being a doctor where you go to med school and then you're a doctor and then you can get a job where doctors get jobs. Getting a film degree in no way guarantees that you'll get any work, and not having a film degree in no way excludes you. Mm-hmm. And so I knew, if I had figured it out when I was 22, maybe I would have done it. But this is, I was 35, and I thought, I think I just need to do this. I don't know. It literally, it never even occurred to me as an option.
And one of the things that you were describing or detailing as you were telling this, the story about your life, and I think it's a significant point for a lot of folks, and it's a reason that we need to sort of relook at the way that we educate folks, and especially, I'm also speaking from the perspective of a professor because I teach college students, is that we cannot always teach in that one style, which is a very passive approach where we're pushing out information to our students. We need a combination of passive and active, because what you've just explained is something that I see often, is that you might have someone who is really engaged with the work but just can't go through the process of academic rigor. So we need to be able to reach our students in a lot of different ways. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, you didn't have any formal training, but do you believe that this had any impact on your ability to learn filmmaking or to be good at it sooner than later?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if I had gone full-time to film school and gone to somewhere like UCLA or USC, where I was being taught by the people who are the best in the world and surrounded by other people who are doing it, I would have learned it more quickly.
Yeah.
But it would have taken a huge shift. I wouldn't have been able to make money while I was doing that. And it would have taken me knowing right away that that's what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that I think by the time I really got my brain around the fact that, I can do this for a living, like this can be my entire job, I was far enough down the train there. I'd already won festival awards and things like that by that point that it didn't make as much sense to go back to school at that point.
Understandable. And so did you review any particular films or cinematographers' work to shape your style? How did you come up with your own style?
Oh, I'm still coming up with my own style. Yeah, I mean, I would watch a little bit of everything, and I'd always try to break down what it is that I liked about it and what I didn't and what I thought made it good and what didn't. The thing I would have loved about film school is, like I said, having just that direct feedback from people you trust on what you've done to say, you could have done this a little better this way. I spent a lot of my early career having to compare my work myself to the things that I like and deciding how it wasn't good enough there. But in terms of developing my style, I think it really is just a question of opening yourself up to the possibilities and listening to what the inner voices are telling you and trusting what the inner voices are telling you.
And that's one of my really big things that I've really started to focus on now is listening to that inner voice. And a lot of us don't listen to it. Sometimes we think of it as being noise. But what I've learned through my journey is that when you listen to that inner voice, when you have that random thought or that idea, there's something to it. So even if you don't act on it immediately, for me, I write it down and then I come back to it and say, well, why was I thinking about that? Why did I hear that? Especially if I'm not thinking about it at that particular moment. Do you agree with that, or is that how you do it?
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. That listening to yourself is the most important thing, and not dismissing anything that comes to mind. All of the books I read about directing and writing also, at least all the books that I liked, would focus on trusting your instincts. And when the weird things come to mind and your first thought is like, oh, I can't do that.
Well, and we're going to have to take another break. Sorry, we've got to go to another break, and we'll come back and talk about instincts.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Good morning. It's WOL Traffic Update is brought to you by the Ad Council. Good Hope Road at Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue. It looks like it was an accident eastbound. Good Hope Road is closed at Martin Luther King Avenue right now, so that is going to be subject to police direction. Also, a report of fuel spill, Independence Avenue at 10th Street Southeast. Police still there to guide you through that. Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov. Now your WOL weather forecast brought to you by Food Lion for today. Scattered thunderstorms this afternoon, a high near 87. Some more in the evening and overnight down to 71. Tomorrow partly cloudy in the morning, and could see some more scattered thunderstorms in the afternoon and a high near 86. Right now, when you submit recipes on foodlion.com's new recipe portal, you're automatically entered to win amazing prizes like a family vacation. No purchase necessary. Learn more at foodlion.com/win. Steve Hirshhorn for News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back to Beyond Just Talk. If you'd like to join the conversation, you have one more opportunity to do so at 1-800-450-7876. We're talking to Barry Gribble today, an award-winning director and writer. And before the break, we were talking about listening to your inner voice and following your instincts. So, Barry, continue, please.
Yeah, I was saying most of the books I read on writing and directing focused on that and said, you listen when you come up with some random thought in the middle of the process that you, like you said, you think it's just noise, or you think, oh, that's ridiculous. Why was I thinking that? Mm-hmm. Usually that's the most important piece. You really have to look at that. There's a book called Directing Actors by Judith Weston that's sort of my Bible of directing, for directing actors, at least, not the technical side. And I was fortunate enough when I came out to L.A. to be able to take workshops with her, which is exactly why I came to L.A., to say, instead of sitting back and reading a book and contemplating it, I can meet these people. I can interact with them.
Right.
And she was fabulous on that, on always just like whatever random thought jumps into your mind is important. That's a very important thing. And just, you have to trust your instincts. One of the early things I saw it was talking about the auditioning process when you're watching actors do the lines and trying to decide, do I like this person, do I not? Or watching a scene saying, did they do this scene well or did they not? One of these directors was writing and he said, you know what, and it's a very accomplished director, said if I'm watching a scene and I nod off, if I just start daydreaming, if I start thinking about something else, he said it used to be that I'd like beat myself up, like, oh, pay attention.
Right.
And then I understood that, no, that means it's not working.
Mm.
And the nodding off random thought, I'm not paying enough attention to what I'm doing thought is a really important thought. Like
right.
that tells you something and you have to listen to that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just having such a great time just listening to this conversation, but I want to also make sure that you have time to sort of promote some of your work. So can you tell us about some of the things that you've got coming up?
I've got a couple things out right now that I've directed. There's a web series called Ruby and Martin that is out. If you speak Vietnamese, there's a web series called Showbiz Zao Zao that I did for DirecTV. But most of what I'm doing right now is trying to sell TV shows. Mm. And unfortunately, there's not a lot. Sometimes I'll do pilots that I put in festival, and on my website, there are a couple of pilots there that I've done for festivals.
And why don't you give us your website address real quick?
It is integralarts.com or integralarts.com if you are British. In the TV world, it's really different. Festivals don't have as much to do with it. The two festivals, the New York Television Festival, which is fabulous, and the Independent Television Festival, which used to be in LA but now moved to Vermont, is really good. They're great for having a place to go and learn from experts and meet your peers. But in general, the TV industry is 90% of it happens behind closed doors in a way that, unfortunately, people's support can't really help you too much.
Right.
A network like NBC or Fox, every year they'll buy maybe 60 ideas for TV shows and have people write those shows. And then maybe 15 of those they'll shoot pilots for, and then 3 of those might make it to the air. Mm. And so the people who wrote those 60 pilots are all making a fine living writing pilots, but what they're doing never ends up on television and never gets a chance to have a fan even,
Right.
So I've been working in development. I'm working with a couple of people who are very successful showrunners and trying to develop TV shows with them. And it's sort of been my strategy in coming out to LA because it's a challenge, no matter who you are, to go it alone. Mm-hmm. And so I've been trying either through actors or other writers or directors to attach to people who like my ideas and like what I'm doing, who have a greater reputation in the town and have some clout to help bring it somewhere. So that's sort of been my strategy, and most of that doesn't end up out for public view, basically.
Now, that's sort of interesting because you're an independent filmmaker, correct?
Yes.
And so why did you decide to go that route? You're new to the business, you're an independent filmmaker, so why did you go that route versus being associated or working for an established entertainment powerhouse?
Well, to be honest, I will do that when I can do that. But once upon a time, they had a studio system where you would be attached to a studio and you would do all of your work for that studio. And it happens sometimes now, people will get development deals on the highest end where they do that. But the vast majority of writers, actors, directors in Hollywood, especially in television, are freelancers throughout. Mm. They are every job they're trying to go to a different studio, a different network. You get the groove of people who you go back to, but by and large, it is a freelance world completely. And so it's about each gig is funded by a powerhouse, but generally, as a writer, you're not permanently attached to that powerhouse.
And I think that's a great transition to ask you, what are some of the challenges of being a writer and director?
That's interesting. They're very, very different. It's interesting that there are so many people in the indie world who are writers and directors. The film, and most of what I've done, I've been writer and director. But strangely, they're very, very different processes. I mean, they really go hand in hand because it's both about the storytelling. Mm-hmm. But writing is usually, except on television shows, writing is a very solitary endeavor. whereas directing is all about relying on other people constantly. The only way you can direct is by having very talented people around you and trusting them and empowering them. And so I think for both of them, though, I think, it's a matter of just the challenge is finding your vision and honing your skills. And both of them have that combination of just pure artistic vision that you just have to find an inspiration, and then the absolute mechanics of the craft of just blocking out a scene as a director, blocking out a scene correctly and doing it and shooting it and knowing how can I create this mood? How can I create that mood? How can I express this visually? They're just tools to the trade that you learn. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it's about finding and trusting your inspiration. The biggest festival success I had was with that pilot dog, which is on my website, integralarts.com. And I warn you, it has very adult language, has HBO kind of language in it. Mm-hmm. That was the first piece I'd done. Everything else I'd done up until then, I was sort of trying to guess what people would like. Mm-hmm. And that was the first one where I thought, I'm just making this for me. I'm just making what I want to make, what comes out of me and what I want to put on the screen. And I don't care if anybody likes it. And ironically, more people like that than anything I did. And I think that's part of the hard part of both writing and directing is, finding and trusting that inspiration. It's important.
But that was like a $1 million gem of what you just provided, is that you said you're making it for me. Don't worry about what anybody else thinks about it, and just do it and see what the outcome is. Because what we can't do is presuppose, pre-guess, or assume what others are going to think about what it is that we're doing, especially when you're doing something that's artistic. Yeah,
exactly. And it was funny. I don't often quote Top Chef, but I watched this a while back. I saw an episode of Top Chef, and they had a piece come out. Like somebody brought out a piece, and they're like, "Wow, this is too salty." And the chef said, "Well, yeah, it's more salt than I usually do, but you guys tend to like saltier stuff, and so I added more salt." And they looked at him and said, "Like, how can you stand in front of us making something that you don't love yourself? Mm-hmm. Like if you don't love it, who can, basically?" And I think that's true with anything that you create, is you have to make what you think is right.
Right.
And that's, for you got to make the show that you would want to listen to. Mm-hmm. And trust that being that true to your heart is going to impact other people. Right. They're gonna feel that because that's what you're doing.
Right. And so, Barry, unfortunately, we've about run out of time, and I have about 20 seconds. So what advice would you give someone who wants to get into this business?
Get a camera, start shooting.
Okay.
Is the best advice. And read as much as you can. Think about film school. If that's the way you learn, film school is great. But more and more people are discovered in this business by what they post on YouTube and becomes popular.
So we'll leave it there and say just put yourself out there and take a chance, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Barry Gribble, thank you very much for being on my show today. Well, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed today's show. On next week's show, my guest will be Charles Britt, who is a dynamic STEM education program coordinator at the Northern Virginia Community College, who tirelessly works to give back to the community. Remember, your candle is fueled from within, so don't let anyone reduce or block the fuel to maximize its brightness. Enjoy the rest of your week. Until next time, my friends, have a good one.
.1450 WOL.